Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Plus podcast. I love doing these shows because you just get the chance to talk to some really, really interesting people, and today is no exception. Lovely listeners and viewers. The man I'm talking to today is a man called Tom Heap. He's a very, very familiar voice on the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC. He's been making shows for many years on the various channels. He's also on British TV on a very popular show called Countryfile. He'll explain all of this in this episode. But it was a real joy talking to him, and he's just published this book, and I genuinely don't care about plugging. I'm very happy to plug it. 39 Ways to Save the Planet by Tom Heap, and it's got a foreword by Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is fantastic. And he's just been to California to interview him. Jealous much? A little bit. But it was a real joy talking to Tom. He's got some great things to say. These are amazing technologies, some of which regular viewers and listeners to Fully Charged Show will be familiar with. Some not. I can guarantee that. And he's just got such a great broad experience and understanding of the challenges that we all face. And opportunities that we all face, that we all have in front of us, which is, essentially against the background of really quite frightening possibilities, a basic optimism that we can do something about it. So that is really good. Anyway, before we start that, let's just have a quick word from our wonderful sponsor who makes the Fully Charged Plus podcast a possibility to tinkle into your lug holes, and that means your ears. My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future. Well, thank you so much for supporting that. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Plus podcast. Have a look at, subscribe on YouTube or on your favourite downloading thing, and tell your friends about it, and that's it. So there we go. Please welcome onto the Fully Charged Plus podcast, Tom Heap. Tom, thank you for joining me for this. This is going to be, I'm so excited about this because I've listened to you for years, and this book just kind of, I don't know what I'm going to say. It punches above its weight because it's not a big book; it's only small. But it just approaches all the arguments and discussions and debates I have about the energy transition in a really clear way, and more. It covers more areas than I've ever thought about. And I just want to quickly list the chapter headings because I think that, or not the chapter headings, the group headings: energy, nature, farming, society, transport, buildings and industry, waste. That covers sort of human activity on the planet pretty effectively.
They've all got a role to play, for sure.
Yeah. And that is a brilliant thing. So can you, for our viewers and listeners that are outside the UK, because I know you and your voice very well from your work on the BBC, but for people outside the UK, can you give a sort of rough background of where you come from and how you came to do this amazing book?
Sure. So I've been a journalist for 30, 35 years plus, mainly in broadcast. And in the last 20 plus years, really focusing on environment, climate, rural affairs, food, that whole kind of what might broadly be considered a sort of an area with a sort of natural underpinning, if you like. And I appear on a television program in the UK called Country File, which is one of the most popular factual programs in the UK, which is really looking at all aspects of rural life, from the grim to the gorgeous. And I tend to do the grim bits, which is why people nickname me the Grim Heaper on Twitter, which I have to say is pretty good. It is pretty good. Respect to whoever thought that up, because it's like everyone else does the sort of fluffy bunny stuff, and the local artists painting lovely scenic pictures of the coastline, and then I come and do something about bird flu, and it's like the four horsemen of the apocalypse have arrived on their screen. Anyway, and I also do a long-running series on Radio 4 called Costing the Earth, which is a half-hour radio doc, goes out 26 weeks a year. And most recently, and in connection with, I think, why we're talking, in the last year, in 2021, I've been doing this series, 39 Ways to Save the Planet, which is both a radio series, podcast, and a book.
Right. That is a very good thing. Here's the one thing. Okay, so I'm slightly jealous, I'll be honest, that you've done this book, because I do think it's amazing. But what really got my goat was you got an introduction from Arnold. A forward.
Oh, yes.
A forward from Arnold.
A forward from Arnold Schwarzenegger. Oh. And just to prove it, here you go for your video watchers.
There he is, holding the book.
There is the man holding the book. Let's do it this way round. There we go.
Oh, that looks good. Yeah, no, he's there with you. I'm just going to read his own. I'm going to do my very bad Schwarzenegger impersonation for the first line. There is no fate but what we make for ourselves. Isn't just a fantastic line from Terminator. It's a philosophy we can all live in our lives. Use in our lives. Didn't even read it right. What a dude, though. That's great, though. I mean, what an amazing thing. So did you just send that to him out of the blue and see what happened?
It's a much longer story than that, which I'll try and keep brief. I mean, I knew that he was interested in environment, and for those that don't know, when he was governor of California, he brought in a lot of rules and regulations about exhaust emissions, about renewable energy targets, about solar roofs, and things like that. He got bitten by the kind of environment bug, partly because it appealed to his political philosophy of working across the political divide, Republicans and Democrats. And so I wanted someone who was keen about the environment, but came from a slightly different place and might appeal to some groups of society that maybe more conventional environmental voices didn't. So I thought it'd be a nice idea to get him to write the foreword, and there then followed at least 6 months of kind of playing a fish, trying to hook this fish from the other side of not only the Atlantic, but the other side of America as well. A lot of sleepless nights waiting for texts and calls from his people, obviously not from him, late at night for California, UK time. And he agreed. I mean, he had heard some of the podcast, and it kind of chimed with some of his thinking, because it was possibilist. It was excited about what we can do rather than depressed about what's happening. And he agreed, and then he wrote the foreword. And as you've suggested from the little bit you've read, what I love about it is it's not just a bolt-on celebrity foreword. He's really engaged with the matters at hand in the book. And then, of course, came the question, so will you do an interview? To which the answer was yes. I mean, I don't want to make the whole thing dominated by Arnie, this conversation, but then we went out and in September of this year, I actually went and did an interview with him, which was, and Arnold became the 40th way to save the world, if you like. He was the 40th program, because of the way weeks work. We obviously left for a final Friday. And we put Arnold in there, and we also did TV stuff, and it's all online and available on BBC iPlayer. You can see the interview, but it was great fun.
Oh, good. I'm not going to lie. I didn't know you'd done that, and I will now watch it on iPlayer. No, that's fantastic. Good.
He's got some punchy things to say, and quite interesting things about communication and the message, and maybe we'll come to.
But I mean, I think, no, that is really excellent. And I think one of the joys of the book is I'm actually working my way through another book that we're reviewing in a couple of weeks' time. And it's a really chunky read. I'm really enjoying it, but it's taking me a long time, because I start reading it and it's so dense. And it's essentially the history of the Industrial Revolution as regards climate change and environment and the awareness of the environment. But it's a big, hefty book. But this one, I've read so much of it really easily, because it's in bite-sized chunks, which I think is fantastic, because you could just say to someone who goes, well, we're just going to have to throw all the batteries away and it's worse than diesel. You go, well, read this chapter and then read that chapter. It's a very easy book to kind of hand around and say, look, read that, or I'll read it out to you or whatever.
Well, I'm really glad that you say that, because I wanted to make the writing accessible. I also wanted to make the whole tone of it accessible, because having been in broadcast in the environment, particularly the climate change space, for quite a while, I always feel that the first thing you're sort of saying at the start of a climate change program, or indeed of a book almost, is no, don't go away.
Yes.
Come back. Yeah. This isn't going to make you feel guilty and powerless. Yeah. And if it does, you're probably not going to stay and listen and watch.
Yeah.
Or you might, if you're the kind of 5% of the population who kind of, is into that form of the narrative. So I want to make it accessible and appealing, not just for the point of view of getting more listeners or selling more books, but I genuinely believe if we're going to get this environmental message through, it needs to get beyond the 20% who are already converted. Yeah. It needs to reach the rest. Yeah. And that is often done by, in my view, is better done by talking about solutions, being excited about what the low carbon world can bring in terms of fantastic stories of redemption, ingenious inventions, amazing things that not just shiny type engineers are doing, but farmers, divers, lawyers, teachers. They're doing such great things. And I just want to fire people up about the exciting things that are happening out there, because I think that's the way you bring people along and move away a little bit from the sort of killjoy environmentalism. Yeah. And I'm not in any sense undermining the seriousness of the position we're in. I think it is very serious. But I think there are amazing stories of redemption out there.
I mean, that is a thing we've faced very recently, that effectively on the Fully Charged show, we don't mention the climate, and it wasn't really a conscious decision. It was just, I thought from day one, I don't know enough about it. And also, it's not a contentious area I want to have to be contentious in. I've got there's plenty of other areas of contentious, but we've just put out an episode that is about young people talking about the climate, asking experts about the climate, and it has the word climate in the title. It's had the lowest views of any episode we've ever put out in 11 years of making Fully Charged. It is extraordinary.
Well, it's interesting, and I hope this podcast doesn't follow the same pattern. But you and Arnold are on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Arnold Schwarzenegger actually says in the interview that he doesn't even really like the term climate change, because he thinks it's off-putting or misunderstood or whatever. He thinks, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this, that we should frame it as a pollution issue. Yeah. That we should talk about carbon dioxide as a pollutant, because nobody likes pollution. No. Even if you're a far-right climate denial nutter in the US, you don't like pollution. Yeah. Nobody likes it. And carbon dioxide is a pollutant because it's harming our health and our planet's health. So it is a pollutant. And he actually went to court in the US to prove that it was a pollutant, so he was allowed to regulate it in the US. And it gets through to a wider group of people. And I think it's a really interesting communications point. And I'm really intrigued to know that you've basically found your way to the same position.
Yeah, no, it was not by, I wish I could claim it was by incredible insight and intelligence, but it was just sort of by default, in the fact that all I talked about was tailpipe emissions, particulates coming out, and we've just done an episode about non-exhaust particulates, so brakes, tires, road wear, and that tends to that won't have the same effect. It won't be it'll get more views without question, because it's an interesting topic, and it is that element. I think what it is our core audience, and this harks back to what you said. Our core audience is sort of background aware and accepting. If you've bought an electric car and you've put solar panels on your house and you've got a battery in your front porch, or any combination of those things, or you're interested in doing it, or you wish you could do it, we hear that all the time, then you're kind of on that path already. So you don't need some kid telling you how awful you are. There's that element, which I completely understand. Yep. And I think those kids are right, and I have to listen to them, but I also go, oh God.
And the other thing is, and you've kind of just touched on this, I think most people kind of know.
Yes.
the basics of climate change now, and all my broadcasting or whatever is always based on starts from the point of tell me something I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the climate stuff is a bit saying the same thing only louder.
Yes.
And I'm not actually. I think there is a place for that, but it's by no means the only way which we should be telling the climate change narrative. And it should be a much open to a much broader range of melodies, if you like.
And I mean, it is that thing. There was a horrible coincidence a couple of months ago in the UK where I think it was the sort of official government climate spokesperson was a woman who defended the fact that she drove a diesel car because she needed to go and see her mother 200 miles away.
In Wales,
you just go,
wasn't it?
Just the sound of it is just wrong. So then you hear that, and I'm immediately triggered because of our current administration. But then I hear that one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, who lives in Stroud, which is very near where I live, drives a diesel because she's got to take her kids to football practice. And I'm going, well, don't say that. Can you lie about it? Just for now, because that really does undermine everything. You've just been sitting on a motorway stopping people driving somewhere, and you've got a diesel. I can't. That kind of gets my. And what do we do?
Especially if you're. Yeah, I mean, I'm always very wary about. I hope I never preach in what I do, but I'm very wary about. Advocating sacrifice, because I think people make sacrifices in different ways. But if you are advocating sacrifice, and it would seem to me that quite often XR are, then you've got to be very careful about what you do in your own life. And just on the point about electric cars, I know this isn't so much about that, but I actually don't have one at the moment, but I had one for 6 months of this year, and I was using it for countryfile and costing the earth, and I consider that a very testing, demanding workout for an electric car, because it's all parts of the country. It's not often off the motorway network. It's I'm often in a hurry. Days are long. I want to get back. I want to get to and fro. And I made it work. Right. I mean, yes, I had to change the way I thought about it, and I did plan, and I railed occasionally against the flakiness of the charging structure. But I did make it work. So when I read that thing from the minister saying, she couldn't make it sometime in case her mum fell ill in Wales, I just thought that actually just requires a tiny bit of planning and a tiny bit of thought, and you can make this work. I think there's a separate question about whether you should keep your old vehicle going for longer, but we don't want to get into that at the moment.
And I mean, I think the critical thing here, because without question, the charging network is now, I would say now, this year, under more strain than it's ever been, because there's so many new electric cars. It's the levels of infuriated new electric car drivers have gone up. If you had a graph of it, it would be vertical and totally understandable. But if you tried to do that, I'd say even 5 years ago, it would have been much, much harder, as in the charging network was that much less reliable, less, commonly spread out. So it has got better, but it is, I've done it very recently where I've gone to an old charger and I'm going, I know this isn't going to work, but I'm going to try. And I plug it and it's dead as a dead rabbit. It's roadkill. But then when you do use one that works straight away and it goes ping, that for me, after going through all the agonies of, you've got to have the right card or the membership or the app, to be able to drive up to a charger, plug your car in, press your debit card and it goes ping, starts charging. That is heaven. That is heaven. Absolutely. And it does happen. Yeah. But anyway, we're not focusing directly on that. One of the things I just wanted, because one of these things that I never knew. So I learned something I never, ever knew. It's such a good stat. So according to the International, and this is in the chapter Solar Flare, according to the International Energy Agency, it can now be produced, this electricity can be produced for $20 per megawatt hour, which I had heard that stat before. And that means if you plugged in the average UK house and were only charged the wholesale price of electricity, your annual electricity bill would be about $30, which is 22 quid in England a year. Yeah. And when you hear that, you go, well, something is happening. Well, I understand how the national grid works up to the point where we're paying money to have that electricity sent down a wire. It's not like, and then obviously the company that put the solar panels in is got to pay for it, make a profit, blah, blah, blah. But what it does tell us is fossil fuels are really expensive. I think,
Yeah,
without any question.
I think it does, and one of the reasons for including stuff in the book about solar, wind, solar thermal was some of the biggest bites out of greenhouse gas emissions are going to be made by expanding existing technologies. Yeah. So, yes, it's great to look in the lab and try and find some shiny new silver bullet for climate change. But someone used this expression that now is better than new when it comes to climate change solutions. And I think there's quite a lot in that. Yeah. Quite a lot of, expanding and accelerating things that we already do. So that's why within those topics, I tried to find interesting stories and interesting people who are facilitating the overall growth of solar panels, wind energy, both onshore and offshore. And as I mentioned earlier, solar thermal, which I think is a bit of a Cinderella technology, needs to be a lot more interest in that, because I think these are some of the things that will take some of the biggest bites, certainly in terms of generation.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think the other key, which I'm really glad you covered that story, is that. I mean, it's one of those things that's so difficult to understand. I've had it explained to me, and it's still confusing. But that you see a wind turbine on a hill when you're driving, especially in Scotland, where I've just been. You've just been there too. Hundreds of wind turbines on, and some of them aren't going. And you go, well, oh God, look at them. They don't work. They're broken. The wind's not blowing, or whatever. And they've been turned off. That's I think the humorous thing, although it's painful, humorous thing about wind power is it's too efficient. It produces too much electricity when we don't need it. So they're constantly having to curtail it, which costs a fortune, which is stupid economics. But
it is stupid economics, but it's a shame to see that wind going to waste. But if you've got a gas-fired power station, you sometimes turn it up and down according to the demand of electricity. In some ways, I don't think it's
no. I mean, and also we're not aware of that as people. Yeah, I don't know that, but I mean, one of the key things you covered, and I don't think it's the solution, but I just love it, is Gravitricity. That company, with you just go. That's basically a sash weight, a ginormous sash weight down a mine shaft. So
I think I mean just to elaborate on that a bit more. So it's the idea that when you've got extra energy, spare energy on the grid from your wind turbines, spinning around at night, or maybe a very bright day and you've got lots of solar, you use that energy to lift up a weight. And then when you need the energy, you let it go. Now, in a sense, this is just what we already do with water, with pumped hydro. It already happens quite a lot. But the idea is to supplement that with very big weights, like thousands of tons, in very big holes that might be kilometers deep. And interestingly, one of the things that I think is good about this, and one of the areas they're actively exploring, is old mining areas, coal mining areas. Because they have the holes in the ground, and they have workers who might soon be out of a job. And, in part of the just transition, if we can find ways of creating low carbon employment for people like that, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it will never be a mass energy storage solution, if you pardon the pun, because it's surprising how little energy actually it needs to lift a weight, or how little energy you get from dropping it. But in terms of what they call grid balancing, and as one of the suite of solutions, it's really good. And I just love the elegant sort of grandfather clock simplicity of it.
Yes, absolutely. And also using existing human-made holes in the ground. There's no one's going to dig a new hole to make this thing. You're going to use an existing one. Because there's another. I'm not sure if you do cover that. I mean, it's a thing I've only heard about recently, which is where old coal mines that are flooding, and they're basically using effectively ground source heating. They're using pipes in the because it's warm, because it's so warm down there, which is
funnily enough, we don't cover it in the book, but literally in the last week, someone has said to me, for your next 39 ways, as yet uncommissioned or unwritten, perhaps you'd like to come and consider mine water. I think it was coming in County Durham. Actually,
I think I've only heard this. Yes, I think you're right. I've only heard about that recently. But then the other ones that I think are interesting that you cover, which is farming. So I live in a rural area. My neighbours have cows, Dexter cattle, which when I look at, I walked around with them a couple of years ago and went, there's really very little else you could do with this land. They're on a very rough bit of steep pasture in the Cotswolds. You could plough it probably, or if you could do market gardening, intensive market gardening, if you could get the manpower to do it. So, it's not impossible, but actually they're not doing that much damage. I no longer eat meat, but I still eat dairy stuff. So it's, it's a personal choice about digestion and health rather than, and I used to eat those cows. I used to buy some beef off my neighbours because it was really good. And I knew I went, it's that one. I'd see the cow going off to be slaughtered and go, it's that one. But I mean, that is such a huge area of.
Yeah. You've touched on a number of things which I do include in the book in a number of different ways. So just starting with the cow end of the question, I mean, it's very interesting because there are a number of ways of reducing the climate impact of cattle. Yeah. It's mainly about methane when it comes to cattle, coming out predominantly the front end actually as belching cattle, and really there are. I mean, just it's a classic sort of suite of ways. So breed. If you look at a typical field, those Dexters you were talking about, it's quite possible that one of them was emitting maybe 20-25% less methane than another.
Right. Wow.
Let's breed from them.
Wow.
Let's stick rosettes on those kind of cattle rather than the ones just that have the shapely bum that currently.
Can I just ask? I didn't realise that. I really didn't realise that there are individual cattle of the same breed who produce varying amounts of methane. I just had no idea about that. Wow, that's extraordinary. Wow.
Yeah. So let's work harder at breeding, and then you've got feed additives. People talk about there's particularly a seaweed additive, but other things they're looking in the diet that could change the bacterial makeup of the rumen of the cow, because you've got these so-called methanogenic bacteria which put out the methane. And then you've got actually changing the grazing so that because cow pasture and animal pasture generally can lock up carbon in the soil if you manage it correctly. So you're then offsetting some of your methane emissions by carbon you're emitting. And finally, if you have housed cattle, and a lot of cattle are housed, particularly in the dairy world, people are looking at ways of trapping the methane in the building and then stopping it escaping to the atmosphere. So I think with cattle, it's a sort of, I think it's going to be difficult to reach zero climate impacts. Maybe in 30 years we might get there, but I think we can certainly lower it. And then just to mention the other thing you do, this book is not primarily about what you can do in your life. It's not mainly aimed at that. But there are a couple of chapters which do refer to that. One of them is about diet, and one of them is about sort of consumption behavior, as in, buying stuff. And I think that's where we do actually have reasonable sized levers in our hands on those two topics. And when it comes to diet, I mean, I think most people are agreed that with meat, less but better would be a good thing. Some people want to go all the way with meat and dairy and have none. And I think the key to making that achievable is making it desirable. And that's all about, it's about recipe. It's about, thinking about what we eat. And actually we feature in the book people working on this in schools and hospitals and prisons, people where you can't escape from the diet. No, and in these kind of institutional settings where you're perhaps reaching people who aren't, let's say, the classic Waitrose or M&S shopper who might already be converted. You're going to reach out to another group of society, and if they come away from a time at school or university or hospital or prison and say, you know what, that vegetarian stuff, that was some pretty good recipes. Now I'm going to try those a couple of times a week. You're on something.
I mean, it is related. I recently had a burger in Utrecht in the Netherlands in a vegan pop-up restaurant. And I honestly questioned. I said, look, I don't want to eat any more meat. It's a choice I made many years ago. There's something wrong with this. There is no way that this burger is not meat. I just thought they were. I didn't know these. Who are these people? We were told and it was a very cool hipster pop-up restaurant. it was extraordinary, because I've had a thing called an Impossible Burger in the United States, which was visually, smell-wise, everything about it 100% convincing. Very hard not to be, until you ate it, and then it didn't taste like a beef burger. That was a few years ago, but it was really nice. I'm not slagging it off. I've had, there are sort of Linda McCartney pulled pork burgers that are, very intriguingly non-meaty. This thing was utterly convincing to be, and I don't know what it was, but it was, they were very insistent that it was vegan. Well, no, not even vegetarian. It was a vegan burger, because it was so convincing. So there are now, I think that there is something to be said for, like lab-grown meat. I've seen a chicken nugget, but I wasn't allowed to eat it in San Francisco because it cost about £12,000 to make. But it's a 3D printed. It is identical chemically and structurally to a piece of chicken, but it's been made. It's got everything, all the chemicals, everything in it. Yeah. And you just think, well, that's
I have to say, part of that makes me think how far a chicken nugget is from a chicken.
Well, yes,
you see what I mean. It feels fairly artificial, even when it's supposed to be made of chicken.
People may already be eating them for all we know.
It's knitted.
Yeah. But that side of it is, it's a difficult one, because I was a carnivore for most of my life, and the last 8-9 years I've been sort of vaguely vegetarian. So I'm probably more likely to be attracted to something that's a bit meaty. My daughter has been a vegan since she was a kid. She just never ate meat, and she doesn't want something that's a bit like meat. She's not interested.
Fair enough. Which I think absolutely fair enough. But it also raises something else, which I feel quite strongly that I mentioned kind of in the introduction of this book, is that too many people in the environment space are like, for those that you can remember, are like the people in the life of Brian, the protest groups in the life of Brian. God. So it's the Judean People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea. They're so busy, they can spend too much time attacking, in effect, people who have different versions of their own beliefs, rather than attacking the big enemy. Yeah. And in my belief, the big enemy, which is burning stuff, which we have founded civilizations on for 2,000 years, that is a very big task.
Huge.
And
huge.
Let's join together. You may not like the idea of eating, in your case you do, but other people may not like the idea of eating less meat. Other people may not like the idea of, getting nuclear power. Other people, might not like the idea of driving an electric car or changing their behavior or having to turn the heating down. I'm not asking you to push something you don't believe in, but at least don't spend your energy kind of attacking that thing, which is basically driving towards the same lowering the carbon, burning less stuff goal. Yeah. We really need, environmental groups really need to focus their energy on the enemy, not on each other. And they do sometimes spend a bit too much time focusing on each other.
Goodness me, absolutely. And it is very, very depressing. And it's certainly my entire adult life, I've been very aware of that. I remember actually breaking up a fight, which I'm not a sort of person who can break up a fight, but believe me, the two gentlemen who were fighting made me look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. They were so, and one was from the IMG, the International Marxist Group, and the other was from Socialist Worker, and they were arguing at a disco about whether they should play Led Zeppelin, because one of them said Led Zeppelin were fascists. And they started slapping and pushing each other. And I just said, shut up. And I put on David Bowie and just got on, just get over it. What's your problem? And that kind of summed up that unbelievable, meanwhile, outside that tiny little bubble, the world was being ruled by the most ruthless, vicious capitalists that we've ever known. And they weren't even, they didn't care a toss what the IMG or the Socialist Workers said. Had no impact. But you're absolutely, I think that is a critical thing, and that's why we've been pushing stop burning stuff as an idea, because it's daft. The human race will never, I don't think, absolutely be able to stop burning anything, but we can certainly wind it down, and it makes every thought very easy to then analyze. Right? So if I do this, am I burning anything? That it started for me with an electric car that I realized I'd charged off solar panels, and I drove it down to Dorset, where there's a water mill that generates electricity, which we were filming. And they let me plug my car in there, and I drove it back on electricity that was generated by water. And nothing was burnt to do what was up then, what would it have been, 140 mile journey, I know I've never been in a world where that was even remotely possible. And you can argue about, well, you had to burn stuff to make the car, and you make the batteries and the solar panels and the copper in the wires, blah, blah, blah. But the actual journey itself, nothing was burnt to do that. And that was 10 years ago I managed to do that.
Yeah. And presumably, just to raise the question, in the trends, presumably, on the manufacture of the vehicle are presumably moving more and more towards them being made with renewable electricity rather than fossil fuels, I take it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, in fact, the team are going to Zwickau, which is the Volkswagen plant that makes all their electric cars. They only make electric cars there. In fact, I think it is one of their oldest plants, huge. It was in East Germany. It's near Chemnitz and Dresden. And that, they say, is 100% renewably powered, but they have now slightly modified that. At times of the year, it's 100%. But the point is, that is their goal, is to be 100%. So it has all down one, it's a huge factory. And all down one side are some of the biggest land-based wind turbines in Europe. So they're real monster. Yeah. And the whole roof is huge, thousands of acres covered in solar. They've got massive batteries. A lot of their energy is coming from that, but they actually are not 100%. But they're close. But I mean, that is possible to do.
Indeed. And 95% or 90% is
still pretty good.
Very, very good.
Yeah.
And once again, because the environmental space is rather prone to piety and fundamentalism, you can sometimes make the perfect the enemy of the good. So people will. I mean, Volkswagen need to be careful about what they claim, for sure.
I think we have to remember that. Yes.
but at the same time, we need to say well done for getting to 90%. Not oh my God, you failed to get to 100.
No, that is absolutely true, and I mean it is that. We're seeing that happening now, and that I think that's the other side which I love in your book, and that point that I've made about the cost, is that there is a equal, if not more, economic cost, because when like my neighbours, that what's annoying is, let me tell you this, Tom, when I first had an electric car in this village, it's only 28 houses, no one else had an electric car. I was special. I stood out. There's now, I think, 14 people in the village who've got bloody electric car. I hate them all.
Not special anymore, Robert.
No,
I'm so sorry.
I'm really mundane and just dull. Just another annoying old bloke. It's very annoying. But what an amazing change that is. But the point is, I'd say 90% of those people, it's an economic decision above all else. Because they've worked out, it's cheaper. It's cheaper. It's, because if you live out here, not having a car is very difficult because our nearest shop is 8 miles away, so it's a bit, it's a bit of a weird, a quirk, but it is a lot cheaper, just by the pence per mile you spend driving an electric car is hugely less. It's about 60-70% less than the cheapest petrol one. That said, there's still a huge amount of huge SUVs that do the school run and pop up to Tesco's. Which is pretty depressing. But the people who've been round to my house who are interested look at batteries on walls, solar panels on the roof, and I show them my electricity bill, and that's what they're not worried about. But
it's interesting you say with electric cars, you now consider they're cheaper per mile, and I think it. No, I mean, I'll agree with you. I think it depends how much you buy them and how much you use them, how much you pay up front and where your electricity comes from and all those kind of things. But what I was actually going to say was, I think in the domestic context, it's still quite difficult actually to make the economic argument for energy saving and using less and using more, green energy, because people will hate what I'm about to say, especially in the recent context of fuel price rises. But in many ways, fossil fuel is still too cheap to make, particularly in the domestic space, to make it worth, if people are only motivated by economy, to make it worth making the change. And that's because we're not paying the true cost of fossil fuels. We don't pay anything for the cleanup, for the damage, for the environmental impact. If you look at your water bill, less than half of it comes from the provision of water. Right. More than half of it comes from cleaning it up afterwards. on fossil fuels, we're only paying the first half, and some of that is frequently subsidised, and we're not paying the true cost. And I do think we're going to need to have a slightly more grown-up conversation about fuel costs and whether they should, whether it is reasonable for them to pay the full cost of their production and environmental impact, which I think it is. And then have an allied conversation about how we're then going to help those who will struggle to afford that. Yeah. But at the moment, I think there's a bit of sort of moral freeloading by the middle classes who can afford to pay a bit more for their energy, but don't want to because they'd rather spend it on a foreign holiday or a nice set of Le Creuset or going out to dinner.
Darling, you can't have too many Le Creusets. It's a basic human right. I'm not even going to explain what those are for anyone who doesn't know, but it's not interesting. But no,
posh pots and pans.
Yes, pots and pans. But here's I think a key point, and you're absolutely right. There's no disagreement at all. But we've been to see a very large housing development in Neath in South Wales, near Swansea, and they've just broken the ground on a hugely bigger one. So the first one we went to see, I think, was 280 houses, somewhere around that, and a large proportion of those are affordable homes. So for low-income families, and they have ground source heating. This is how they're built: very high insulation, ground source heating. Batteries in each house, solar on all the roofs, and by chance electric car plugs if they have off street parking, which most of them did. And the first lot of those houses have now been lived in for getting on for a year. The first one, so we went there about 3 years ago, and their monthly annual bill is under £10. It's only electricity.
That's great.
So, and I think this is the point. There's absolutely, what I've done in my house is a massive self-indulgent, middle-class, elitist, privileged bubble of elitism tosser because I've had the money to do it.
Don't beat yourself up. Stop now.
I want more insults. I can't remember them all. And there's no way I can live long enough to genuinely economically benefit from what I've done. But that's, I didn't go on a cruise. I put a battery on my wall. Yeah. But what it's done is show me what impact that has. But what's so much, that is in a sense utterly irrelevant. What is so much more important is the one or two house builders in this country, and thankfully a lot of house builders around the world who are building new properties, particularly in Netherlands and Germany and Scandinavian countries, where it's so unfair on poor low-income families in old-fashioned houses because they are paying way more to keep warm, to have hot water, to be able to have lights on. It's just brutally cruel. And the cost per square metre of these homes that were built like this was 5% more than the government statutory. This is how much you've got to be able to build these houses for. Not hugely expensive.
I mean, no, but I mean, you raise a critical point there. Is why isn't that the regulation? Why isn't that the insistence that we build like that? Yeah. And one of the reasons why I say would that all the solutions were in individuals' hands, but there are the massive solutions tend to be in government, business, finance, inventors' hands, and a classic example of that would be building regs. Yeah. I mean, for new houses, let's just make these things, part of the condition of being able to build a new housing estate. And another thing, and this is something that is in the book, it's not just about the performance of the house; it's the embedded energy in building the house. We should be building far more with wood, which is basically carbon capture and storage, some up here, and held there, rather than concrete, brick, and steel, which are monstrous causes of carbon dioxide. And now there are plenty of products out there, things like cross-laminated timber, where you can build a house, very cheaply and very efficiently and very thermally efficiently and quickly. But there's enormous conservatism in the building industry, and I say on the buying public. There's a change that needs to happen there, and that is a really critical thing. And people often talk about what choices they can make in their own lives, as we've spoken about. One of them is actually when you buy a house or build a house or think about it, that's when some of your biggest carbon decisions will be made. Yeah. Think about those being made in a way that didn't require burning stuff, to pick up your remark earlier. How about growing your house?
Yes. growing your house and heating it without burning stuff. I mean, that's because that was one of the things.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the first things that the people that were on that building site explained to us. They said when we started work on here, we didn't have to install gas mains. There's no gas on the site. And the one they're doing now is 3,800 houses with no gas. There'll be absolutely zero gas. And I think the argument there really is the technology exists. We're just not using it. You could say even 10 years ago, does ground source heating really work? And what they're doing is drilling down. They're doing that one borehole per 3 houses is how they were doing it. And it heats the house and it cools the house. Anyway, that's the whole other thing. I want to, before we wind up, because it's one of the things, there was something that you just said that reminded me of that you did cover in the book, but I'm afraid I've got a logjam on that because I was thinking COP, because we've just done COP. And I did COP for a whole day, so I feel really experienced. 24 hours I was there. Hardcore. It was an extraordinary, I can't tell now how successful it was. I mean, I was very aware of the Copenhagen one that was a disaster, of the Paris one that was deemed a success and seemed to be a very optimistic thing. I have got no idea how to judge Glasgow, but you were there for longer, weren't you? You were there for a few days.
Yeah, I was there for 8 days or so. And we produced 2 Costing the Earth from there, the Radio 4 documentary that I do. I was there. And I don't know what you felt. When I first arrived, it felt like being in this sort of giant party and I didn't quite know where to stand. Yes. Like when you sort of shuffle around trying to look like you know where you should be standing or who you should be talking to. I felt a bit like that when I first arrived. Yeah. Because there's this sort of massive sort of human anthill, although it's sort of horizontal human anthill, and everyone looks very busy and you kind of wonder what you should be doing. But I kind of relaxed into it after a while and kind of enjoyed, the sort of serendipity of people you meet and talk to, and the energy of the place, the diversity of the place, the fact that there were just so many people with basically a common aim. And you might be a little bit cynical about some of those from the fossil fuel companies who are there, but basically, the people there had a common aim. And my feeling is, and I've been reading some of the sort of science comments that have come out of it, quite a few of those, as well as the politics and as well as the NGO comments. And I am more than glass half full about COP in Glasgow, and it's because in the end, when you think that the final agreement has to be agreed by 190 countries. Now, the idea that you're going to get something that is that passes Greenpeace's muster past 190 countries, which include Russia, China, India, Australia, is for the birds. It's never going to happen. And, you are going to have to accept a compromise. And in some ways, I think that final declaration is significant, but it's by no means the whole COP game. Yeah. We had announcements earlier on in the week about deforestation, finance, methane, energy, all of which, coal, all of which could be improved, all of which, but most, they're all a step in the right direction. Are they going fast enough? No. Have they moved a long way from Paris or indeed Copenhagen? Absolutely they have. I mean, if you look at the kind of the nature of the movement, there's a lot. But the other thing is, I don't think it's all about the COPs. I think COPs help to set some of the direction, but so much of it, especially now, is happening regardless of that. It's happening from inventors, it's happening from teachers, it's happening from landowners, it's happening from lawyers, and it's happening in finance as well. And that is something I don't just think is BS. I find it quite difficult to judge because I'm not a great finance expert. It's probably something I need to work a little harder on. But I've been hearing so much, and also from not just people within the finance industry, but people who know about the finance industry saying there is a real change here. Something is really happening. And you put all those things together, and I think COP is a step in the right direction. It's not nearly as big a step as I would like, but it's a good thing. Yeah, and
I mean the one thing that I picked up on, and that was about 3 different people I spoke to, unconnected, but from industry rather than government or NGOs, from companies, was that their experience was that all the companies were busy talking. There was one event I couldn't make, which is I was really upset. I just logistics couldn't do it. Was a round table discussion with people from 25 different companies around the world, big energy companies, car makers, battery manufacturers, mining people, a very wide range of people. And it sounded extraordinary. That was in a castle outside Glasgow. But because they were all there, they all got together. And now they were doing deals and they were understanding the difficulties and challenges. But they are completely driven for economic and business reasons to develop basically technology that doesn't burn stuff. I mean, it's as simple as that in every aspect. And that I found incredibly encouraging because they said, one of the guys I said, so what do you think about all the decisions? I haven't got a clue what any of them are, but we've just done a deal to build 100 million domestic batteries, or whatever it was they were doing, which was quite interesting that there was the business community seemed very optimistic of the people I met, and I mean, it was I was there for such a short time. It's not really a fair assumption to make, but it did sound, that was the only bit where I went, oh, that sounds quite cool. The stuff that's coming out of that thing, which is in a sense what it's all the things that your book covers. Those technologies are developing regardless of effectively of government actions, or because they're going, oh, here's a bit, let's put in a car charging hub that can charge 50 cars at once, really high speed, and it's got a toilet and Wi-Fi. That basic, it's a business decision to do that.
In a sense, I slightly, I am broadly optimistic about the way things are going, but I almost kind of reject the optimism, pessimism binary thing. What it amounts to is I'm excited about what we are doing and what we can do more of to fight climate change. And I do hope that in the end is what comes from this book, is that there are very exciting things happening, which we need to know about, point one, and that's what, but also we do need to, we need to get behind, and it is about how you behave in their own life, the decisions you make in your workplace, the decisions you make in the shopping centre, the decisions you make with your banking and with your investment. Those are hugely important. And of course, in your space, how you drive, whether you drive electric, whether you choose to leave the car at home and take the bike more, or maybe even an electric bike. All of these things are things we have in our hands. But I think it's about showing that there are the ways. We need to find the will.
And I mean, it is also, I think, the thing that I've become very aware of is, and this actually came up in a panel that I took part in COP, was the term carbon footprint was made by the fossil fuel lobbying industry, the fossil fuel lobbyists, and that's where it first appeared. And there's been a lot of discussion. That's where it's traced back to. It's a bit like range anxiety. That term, those two words, were coined by the PR department at General Motors when they withdrew their electric EV1 and introduced the suburban Hummer. The antithesis of the opposite of an electric car, but because what the thinking is from the fossil fuel industry's point of view, it's your problem. Your carbon footprint is bad for the planet. Well, wait a minute, my carbon footprint is entirely produced and manufactured and sold by you, but it's all my problem. And I think the best manifestation of that is plastic packaging in supermarkets, which is, I've become mildly obsessed with in the last few, but I mean, it's always annoyed me. I think, and that's a generational thing. If you grew up where the milkman came with glass bottles and you got your milk out and you washed the bottles out and you put it back, we're now doing that again. But for years, I bought milk in a plastic carton. Well, why? Why is it in a plastic carton? And then you go, oh, because very clever marketing people said your milk will last longer and it'd be more efficient and you can sell more if it's in a plastic carton. One use, the notion of single-use plastics doesn't come from me as a consumer or you or anyone who's listening to this. We didn't go, we demand single-use plastic. It was effectively, for our benefit. It's easier,
Yeah, well, that's going to say they took advantage of our craving
laziness,
for convenience,
yes,
and laziness.
But then they blame us,
out loud, but our laziness may be implicitly asked for.
But then it's our fault and we should recycle it. And you're going, well, what about I've done it once. I've gone to a Tesco's. As I was packing my stuff, I unwrapped everything that was in plastic. put the plastic on the side. No one complained. They didn't even raise an eyebrow. It was completely fine for them. The only problem was everyone else who was waiting in the queue hated my guts because it took me longer. So I've only done it once. But, I think what I'm saying is that we do need to be aware that there are very clever people whose job it is to delay change, to... they know the oil industry knows its days are numbered, and they're just hoping that number's quite high. I think that's the simple answer. I don't think they're going, everyone will drive combustion engine cars in 100 years' time. They know they won't.
No way. And a controversial thought that maybe to leave the audience with, because we probably haven't got time to unpick it here, is whether they can or should be part of the solution. And I think that's an interesting one. I haven't basically made my own mind up yet, but I partly feel uneasy with the idea of sort of condemning everyone who's involved in it. It is somehow not worthy of being involved in this transition, because I don't subscribe to the view that everyone who works for a fossil fuel company is somehow
intrinsically evil. No.
Is against this sort of stuff. But it's about making sure that it's genuine and it's real and it's happening, rather than it's a cover for, as you say, just extending the time when you're drilling more stuff out of the ground.
It's a really hard one. I mean, it's a dilemma that we've confronted directly, in the sense that there was one episode we made where it was amazing. You may have heard of it, the kind of mileage marathon. It's a thing that Shell have been organising for decades. I mean, 30, 40 years.
I don't know.
They basically support and fund engineering students to build vehicles that can, they've got vehicles that do 3,500 miles to the gallon, but it is a cigar with bike wheels and a very small student. I couldn't get in it. They tried to get me in one. It was comically cruel. Get some fat old bloke in this, you can't do it. But to make them, one of the one I focused on was an electric one that was doing something like 250 miles to the kilowatt hour, where an average car does 3 or 4. It was extraordinary. Czech students, they're amazing. And so that was what I was focused on. That's what we filmed. But to do that, I wore, for 2 shots, a racing suit that they put on me, which had a Shell logo on. We lost 1,000 subscribers within minutes. The hostility of the comments was off the scale, and it was like I'm a shill for the fossil fuel industry. So we have to be really an extraordinary thing. Interestingly, the flip side of that is we've covered the first Shell high-speed electric car charger in a Shell garage. None of that happened. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't wearing a Shell logo anywhere about my person, but we were talking to Shell people who were. We were standing in front of a Shell recharge electric charger, and that was fine. But on that, this is a final note. On that note, I went to a Shell garage the other day to buy screen wash. It had a charger I didn't need to charge the car. It had a charger in the forecourt with a big sign saying electric car charging, and it wasn't working. And I went into the garage and I said, "Is that not on?" He said, "Oh, no, it broke down a few days ago." I said, "Well, can you fix it?" "Oh, I don't know, they'll send someone." I went, "That sums it up. Guys, it's incumbent upon you above all other people. You have the money and the facilities and the staff. Make the bloody thing 100% reliable.
It's an emergency. It's not just
Anyway, on that really depressing downbeat note, Tom, thank you so much. 39 ways to save the planet. Is it on Kindle or anything else? Or audio
it's on all the different systems. It's on, you can order it online. You can order it you can order a Kindle copy, a digital copy, and it fits snugly in a Christmas.
It does. It's a very snug book. Wind turbine robots, gravity batteries, solar rafts, sunken seaweed farms. Love that one. Wooden skyscrapers. Absolutely right. Grazing elk. I love that. Did you see the footage of the white elk? The albino elk. Sorry, no, it's just something that came up on one of those things. Like, why am I watching video of a white elk? But anyway.
You're spending a lot of time going down social media tunnels.
Terrible. Slippery ships, zealous lawyers, and raving gas hunters, all stepping up to cut carbon. It is such a brilliant book, Tom, and thank you. It's such a joy to talk to you. And if you're ever if you ever do any filming at Adam's farm up the road, because we live next door, so let me know.
Oh, right. I knew you were Cotswold. I didn't know you were that close to Adam.
Very...
My doppelganger. A lot of people struggle to tell us apart, but
yes,
I hope you haven't thought this whole interview was spent talking to Adam.
Yeah, no, I think I'm very aware that I wasn't, because he would be so rude to me. He's a very amusing neighbour. Well, there we go. What a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed that. Had a great time talking to Tom. I want to get him back on the show as a kind of contributor when we do group news roundups for Fully Charged News and other podcasts and things. We've got some plans. We've got a few plans for 2022. Yes. Anyway, that's it. I mentioned subscribing before this at the beginning of this show. I'm not going to mention it again, but obviously if you do want to subscribe to the Fully Charged Plus podcast, we'd love that. And that's all I'm going to say anymore. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening and watching.